Hey everyone, welcome to the podcast. I'm recording this live, but I'm going to be streaming it after the event, which I haven't done before. So just FYI. But thank you everyone for watching, listening. Don't forget to subscribe, all of that cool stuff. I've been speaking to so many people recently, and a lot of people, we've been talking about burnout for a while, and that's been happening a lot with people working at home, remote, just finding some kind of balance. But this idea of like loneliness and people feeling lonely at home and at work is a really interesting one. It's something I've been hearing more and more about, and I really wanted to find someone who could talk about that with me and just talk about some of the issues and talk through the topics that people have been thinking about. And so it's a great guy I found called Ryan Jenkins. He's written a great book, which we're going to hear about. He is the co-founder of LessLonely.com, who are the world's #1 resource for addressing workplace loneliness and creating more belonging at work. So no one better to get in. He's worked with loads of different organizations on this topic. And so really, really thankful that he could join us. And let me patch him in. Ryan, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me. Looking forward to our conversation.
Definitely. Loving your microphone, by the way.
At this point, I feel like gotta have this type of gear, and
you got to have some good tech. I've got mine here, just slightly under the.
You've got a good job of hiding yours. I haven't figured out how to do that with mine yet, so I'm still learning.
I mix it. And sometimes it's quite cool to see the mic. Sometimes, sometimes not. Anyway, so you're in Atlanta, Georgia.
Atlanta, Georgia. Yes, and I've been here about 13 years, and it's finally starting to warm up down here. But I love Georgia. I grew up in Denver, Colorado. Took me a while to get used to the humidity. But I travel so much for work and get to go to many amazing places. So having the world's busiest airport in my backyard here in Atlanta is a godsend. And it's got the most direct flights of any airport in the world. So I don't know if I'll ever move.
Did not know that. Love that.
Yeah, it's incredible.
And are you fully remote? Do you go into the office? Like, what's your kind of working style?
Just I'm in my home office now, and then I've got a co-working space. So every now and then it can get lonely here working from home, as you can relate, and so many of your listeners and viewers here. But I'll go into a co-working space, and that's always nice. But then my team and my co-founder and partner, Stephen Van Cohen, he's based in California, and our team is dispersed everywhere. So we've got a remote team.
Nice.
How about you?
And so we're fully remote now, which has not always been the case. So we used to have everyone in the office in London. Then we started expanding globally. So we hired different people in different countries. So we've got quite a few in the US, UK, Europe, Canada. And when COVID hit, none of the UK team wanted to come into the office or were allowed to come into the office. And as it's evolved, as of last week, we are officially fully remote, which is very weird because I've always had a spot to go into and hang my hat.
Yeah.
So it's taken time to get used to. It's all very different. Like the work experience that we have working remote is different to like going in and sitting next to someone, I find.
Yeah, and it's so fascinating right now because, of course, we're talking to so many audiences and clients about, what do we do about our back to work policy, and we're getting invited to speak to a lot of organizations because they are bringing everyone back in the office, and they want to kind of promote this idea of connection and why it's important to get together. And it's tough, and no one's got it figured out, and I still don't think we've quite got our hands around. Let me say it this way: I think we're wildly underestimating how much human connection that we all need in our lives. I think COVID and the pandemic really kind of accentuated all this. But look, I mean, remote work is on the table forever, and hybrid work is a phenomenal option. But we're encouraging folks to really start thinking about, as we choose this convenient option of remote work, what are some other areas that we need to be thinking about or prioritizing, or how do we intentionally start creating other ways in which we can really connect with those that we work with? Because if not, we'll continuously gravitate towards the convenience and more transactional. And if we're not careful, if we're not vigilant, if we're unintentional, we'll continue to just kind of pull apart from each other, whether that's folks in our community, on our team, humans in general. So it's
Yeah,
it's an interesting conversation, no doubt.
definitely. No, definitely. I think it's also quite interesting that people are saying return to work, meaning that people at home aren't really working. It's a, it's actually, it should be it should be return to the office, because people do work at home and have been getting burnt out, haven't they?
Yeah.
And a lot of people I speak to have actually been working longer and harder than they were in the office, and just don't get out as well. A lot of people, you just, what it's like. You just get to your desk, and then suddenly it's the end of the day, and you're like, I haven't even been out yet. I haven't seen another human, unless
Right.
if you've got family and all of that stuff. So I think that's really interesting. But
Yeah,
sorry, go
and
on.
what we've seen happening is we're communicating more than ever before, right? I mean, and we can, with all the technology at our disposal, we're communicating constantly, whether that be emails, text, video, whatever it might be. But communicating is not the same as connecting, and it shows up differently in our brains. And so you've experienced this, right? If you have a significant other, you can tell them, I love you, I love you, love you on text message all day. But unless you're eyeball to eyeball with them and they feel your presence, and you tell them, hey, I love you, it's not the same.
Yeah.
So that last example is a connection. The other is just communicating. And I think oftentimes what happens is, because we're doing so much communication, we're just pushing down the loneliness factor just low enough to where it's not chronic, but over time it eats at us, and we start to languish and we experience burnout. And so I think that's really important for folks to it's an important question to ask is, am I actually connecting, and how might I need to start creating more connections with those that I work with or in my community, et cetera?
How could you know that? How would you know if you're actually connecting with someone or not?
Well, first I thought you were going to go with, well, how do you know if you need connection? That's where I thought you were going to go. And I would say all of us need it. So
Yeah.
find ways to do it. According to our research, so in the book, we surveyed over 2,000 global workers, and we found that 72% of them experience loneliness at least monthly,
Wow.
with 55% saying at least weekly. So we're all experiencing this. And one of the goals of this conversation and the book Connectable is to destigmatize loneliness, right? Because it's been so shrouded in shame for far too long. And it's not shameful. It's simply just a signal, right? We all experience it. It's a universal human condition. And so I hope we can start talking about it more, because once we start talking about it, we can, a pain shared is a pain halved, right? We can start alleviating this and create more connection by talking about loneliness, because it is a universal human condition. So if you think you need connection, you're right. We all need it. We have to fight for it more than ever before. But how do you know if you're connecting with others? I mean, I think humans, we're just wired to connect. So often you can feel it, right? I mean, you've walked away from a phone conversation with a close friend and you just feel better, right? You feel like your well-being's boosted. Or if you're in a moment and you just feel that person's present and they're fully listening, and you feel fully seen and heard, that's what you're striving for. And according to the research, it only takes about 40 seconds to receive what's called a restorative connection. So just 40 seconds with two parties when they feel seen or heard. It could be as simple as, if you see someone who's, out at a store and they need a pen, they're searching for a pen, and you happen to have a pen, just seeing that need and giving them a pen and saying, do you need a pen? A moment like that, 40 seconds or less, can really create a small connection that can go a long way.
Yeah, I love that. So can you only get meaningful connection from in-person contact, or can I also, like us, for example, like even though we're on video, I feel, we've got a connection, there's rapport, there's good energy, but it's different to if we met in person though, isn't it? Like,
great question. Let me back up, and I think it'd be helpful to define loneliness for folks, because it's probably perhaps one of the most, that's the biggest aha moments when we share this information with folks, is this, that loneliness isn't the absence of people, it's the absence of connection. So that could be connection to yourself, your team members, the organization itself, the work itself, connection to purpose. There could be a spiritual element to this. So connection is really what we're going for. So back to your question, no, we don't have to be together to experience connection. And I'm sure many listeners and viewers can attest that you can feel isolated and disconnected from humanity, even if you're in a crowded office space or a crowded
Yeah.
coffee shop or whatever. So again, it's not the absence of people, it's the absence of connection. So yeah, connection can absolutely happen over Zoom or doing it anything digitally. It just takes a little bit more effort and more intentionality to get there. And of course, if it's a bigger group that's in digital, it becomes a little bit harder to
Yeah.
create those connections. You just got to be that much more intentional, but it certainly can work.
Love that. That's so true. How do you is there a moment where, I know that you get the feeling of loneliness, but it takes a moment to realize, doesn't it? Like, or a build up to realize that you're not, lonely, and also you're not quite connected with your team members, the purpose of the organization. How do people, like, how can people realize, like, is there something that people can do to think, right, like, this is not, I'm not feeling right, this is not my spot, time to make a change?
Yeah, like any human emotion, it's complex and it can be subjective, loneliness. And it's the science around loneliness is really new because just like you and I, Lewis, and everyone else on planet Earth, we've been ignoring loneliness. So have the neuroscientists, and they haven't really figured out how loneliness affects and shows up in our brain until about 7 years ago. They really started advancing the science. So it's really new. So as we start talking about it more, as we start understanding loneliness better, I think we're going to start to know more of these signs that we can lean into. But it's hard to say. Does loneliness come first? Then does that lead to burnout? Does burnout happen and then drive us to become lonely? It's hard to say. And again, it's subjective, and everyone experiences loneliness differently. And there's different flavors of loneliness as well.
Yeah.
But
So do you see, sorry to interrupt, are you
no.
seeing people that if they've burnt out, they become lonely, and they're lonely and therefore they get burnt out? Are you seeing there's a connection or not? Not a
Yeah, yeah. There's really, I mentioned the three flavors. So there's the flavor of situational loneliness. So that occurs when if you're moving teams or moving departments or you're moving organizations entirely, or if you move to a different city, those are situational factors that can cause you to feel isolated and disconnected from a community. There's
Yeah.
also differential loneliness. So um, I experienced this. I share the story in the book that when I was starting my orientation as a freshman at Miami University here in the States, I grew up playing sports, and
Yeah.
I'm a older millennial, and digital technology was just growing. Social media wasn't
Yeah.
a thing yet. And an orientation, I remember the instructor was like, "All right, everyone, go to your email and sign up for these courses." And I was like, "Email? I'm supposed to like know how to use email and log in?" And everyone else around me was just flying, and they were signing up for all these courses, and I felt I was completely inept and had no idea what to do. And in that moment, I felt isolated and alone, right? Because I was the only one that didn't know what was going on. So it's this idea of when you have different skill sets or there's a difference in some form or fashion, we can feel isolated. And
Yeah.
then the last one is intentional. So that's when a certain group is marginalized or we
Yeah.
intentionally single out folks. So those are all different ways in which we can experience loneliness. And so again, does burnout happen first? I'm not sure, but I think what's happening, we talk about the Great Resignation and why your show and the work that you do is so important is because folks I don't think have a strong connection to the work they're doing or a strong connection to the organization. They don't feel a strong sense of belonging in these organizations. And I think that's a huge miss for organizations. So if we want to build stronger teams and create a healthier workforce and ultimately a healthier humanity, I think trying to figure out how do we lessen loneliness and create this greater sense of belonging. And I think we'll see burnout start taking care of itself. And some of these other things I think are going to start to dry up too when we feel fully connected at work.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. You see it on social media a lot, because on the other side of this a little bit is when you scroll through Instagram and whatever platform you like to use, people are always talking about you love your work, it won't feel like work, find your passion, will lead you to your purpose, find the job that, you know, like there's this big, like, it's so cool to find a job where you love, which is fulfilling your purpose, and then you're happy, right? Like it just doesn't feel like it. But then you find that most people really just don't find something that they're super passionate about, and it doesn't always fulfill their purpose. And I think that also puts a lot of pressure on people, you know, like they're just doing a job where, because, you know, economics plays a part, right? Like you need to earn
Sure.
money. And so I don't know, it's an interesting dynamic. It's the ideal is, yes, find something that you're passionate about, that you buy into the purpose, the culture's awesome, you know, you're doing good in the world as well as making money. That's got to be the ideal. But I get my messages, I guess, if people, you know, if you're not lucky enough to find it, or you just haven't quite nailed it, you can also, I think, get fulfill your purpose in other ways as well. What do you think about that? Have you seen people like that have just, they're not happy at work, but then they just haven't been able to quite find their spot?
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah, and it can be frustrating too, because we live in a world that's so highly connected now that we can see other people that it appears that they're following their
That's
passion,
it.
or leaning into their purpose, and of course we don't fully know, but again, that feels very isolating, because you think, am I the only one that's not in a job that I love and that I
Yeah, it's like, I saw John's post on Instagram, he loves his job, and you
yeah.
know, but yeah, I mean, you say that's the best version of themselves they want to portray.
Yeah, I think one of the big topics that we unpack in the book, which I think is correlates well here, is this idea around clarity. I think too often people get frustrated, and they blame that this organization isn't, they don't have a purpose, or they don't feel like they're have great meaning in their work. But I think oftentimes what it is this: there's zero clarity. They don't know what the mission of the organization is. They don't know how their work is impacting somebody else. And we studied astronauts in this chapter because, as you can imagine, these are professionals that operate in major isolation, right? 250
Yeah.
plus miles away from Earth. And we specifically studied 𝐲𝐸𝐸 who is the American astronaut. She's the first woman to have spent the longest continuous time in space on the International Space Station. And so she spent over 320 plus days with only seeing 11 different people over that time period. And your personal space is as big as a phone booth.
Yeah, mate, unbelievable. What was
Crazy, right?
how did she experience, like, what was her experience like?
Yeah, she says that regimentation is so important to keep a healthy mental state, and to keep loneliness at bay, because she wakes up and she knows exactly what she needs to do that day.
Yes.
And I think too often people just don't have that clarity. And we encourage leaders, and we encourage professionals to be more clear. And there's another leader that we highlight in the book who has a really large organization, and they've created what they call not just a job description, but also a responsibility description. And it's just
Nice.
one sentence, and it's just one thing that, when all else fails, when everything gets crazy, you can revert back to this one responsibility statement. That is exactly what you need to do to make sure that this organization is running healthy, or to deliver for the customer or client. And it's that type of clarity that can really connect us to the work. And
Yeah.
I think about it like, if you went for a hike and you didn't have a map, and then you got lost, well, that's scary, but it's isolating. You all of a sudden feel alone.
Yeah.
Same thing here, right? If we don't have a map of where we're going, or the type of work, or what type of work we need to get done that day, it can feel very detaching and isolating. We ultimately experience that sense of loneliness. So I think much more accessible for any of us is to find clarity. And
Yeah.
not even purpose and meaning can be hard to grasp, but the idea of clarity can be really helpful.
I love that. I love that. Also, to the astronaut's point of, she seems extremely organized with her time. Like, you get up in the morning, you do your exercise, you make your coffee, you go for a walk, whatever it might be. It's great. It's like, I do that a lot. I diarize a lot of stuff. I diarize my exercise. I make sure like it's the most important meeting of the day. I do things that that keep me in a positive frame of mind. I'm also very organized with, my work when I'm doing things, and we're creatures of habit, aren't we? Like it's nice to be in a routine. It's nice to
Yeah.
break the routine and fresh energy, but it's good to be in, have a nice structure, I think.
Yeah. So tell me more. What else works for you? When do you feel kind of most connected in your work?
My work, I mean, I'm a people's person,
Yeah.
and my work revolves around people. My business is a services business. It's a headhunting firm, exec recruiting, and it's all about people. And the thing that gives me real energy is a conversation like this. We don't know each other so well. We're getting to know each other. We're having a great conversation, and I do that every day, and that gives me energy.
Mhm.
I prefer a real life chat. It gives me a different energy because you can go. I don't know. It's hard to explain, but when you meet someone and you can give them a cuddle, and you read the body language, and you get feed off. It's great. But even a video like this, it's still really nice. I get energized from it. And I arrived at just, I don't know. It was kind of like the second career I had, probably, and I just arrived at something that I really love. It doesn't feel like work, and a lot of time the purpose for us is, with these podcasts, is really we create free educational content for people that helps them find a job, helps them, whatever it might be, stop being burnt out, stop being lonely, or certainly thinking about it. And so the educational part of what I do is great, and it's purposeful, it's interesting, and if we can help people find a job and all of those things, it's great. And so I tried a few different things after university. I went to uni, tried a bunch of different things, and ended up landing on this, which has been really cool. Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, I feel like if you in the recruitment space, you are a connector, right? You're connecting
Yeah.
folks with their ideal employer or work, and yeah, how rewarding.
It's good. Yeah, you get to connect people. You give them access to the best opportunities. You can really help people get on in their lives and careers and stuff like that. You're a sounding board, and it's good. It's good fun. And then topics like this are great because a lot of the time, certainly with loneliness and burnout, is a lot of people will speak with someone like me before a friend, because you kind of don't really speak to friends about these things, right? Like you don't tell your friends how much money you're making a lot of the time. If you're feeling a little bit stressed, burnt out, whatever, lonely at work, you'd probably rather speak to someone who's slightly outside your social circle to get advice. And so you end up, with this privileged information and quite, personal stuff from people.
Yeah.
It's interesting. The other thing is, and so just why to kind of slightly changing the angle of it. So if you're leading a company, or you're a manager and you're leading a team, and how do you identify if someone is feeling lonely so you can help them? Like, are there certain telltale signs?
There are, yeah, and we like to encourage leaders that assume that loneliness is ravaging your team, because according to our
Right.
data, it is, and it's not a matter of if your team is experiencing loneliness; it's how
Right.
many of them are experiencing it. And so some of there's 10 that we identified in the book. I'll just cover a couple of them. So one is around lack of learning and development, right? So if they've got limited participation in a meeting, if they are, not showing up for those career discussions, if they're not asking a lot of questions, that can be a sign that they're detaching and becoming, experiencing loneliness. Someone that skips or resents meetings, that's kind of self-explanatory. If they only talk work, and they're not willing to talk about non-work related things or personal things, that can be a subtle sign.
It's interesting
Yeah.
that, though, isn't it? Because in a work scenario, you're never quite sure how far you can go into probing to someone's personal life.
Yeah.
There's always like it's an unwritten rule, I guess, isn't it?
Yes, and yeah, I like the term non-work, right, rather than personal, because personal feels like, oh, I
Yes,
got to really
non-work's
kind
right.
of dig in
Yeah,
here and something.
yeah.
So there's one organization that we covered in the book that does what they call the inside scoop. And so for every week during their all hands meeting, they allow one person to just take 5 minutes at the top of the meeting to just share something non-work related. So it's kind of
Nice.
like a show and tell, if you will.
Yeah.
And they were doing it virtually. And the one example is they had one of the gals that shared. She was a researcher, and everyone kind of saw her as this very detail-oriented researcher. Well, then she shows a picture of her marathon training, and no one had any idea that she she qualified for the Olympics. I mean,
Wow.
it just blew the mind of everyone. And now they didn't just see her as this, terrific detail-oriented researcher. They now saw her as this like extraordinary athlete. And so now they're able to see the human behind the job. And by sharing more of these non-work related things, they create data points where other people can find a connection, right? And
Pull the
cultivate that
thread
sense
and
of belonging. Yeah.
I
And
love
so
that.
we've got to be intentional about it, because it's called the common information effect. If we get a bunch of work people together, the most common thing that we have in common is work. So we're going to tend to focus on work related discussions. So it's up to leaders, but of course this can, anybody can do this. It's just, how do you start asking questions that draw a little bit more out of the individual, to where we can really start to understand the human behind the job.
Yeah. I think also the video stuff's been interesting because it's a window into people's homes,
Yeah.
the last couple of years, which has been interesting because it's been quite, I think it's been quite like humanizing. I don't know if that's the right word, but if it's an office-based company, and suddenly you're at home and you can see people's art and what's on their fridge and stuff like that. I think people have got, certainly in my company, we've got, I think, much closer and built a much better culture than we had before, because people have been much more open, more human. And I think that's been a really good thing from it.
Yeah, I think too, a good best practice too is when folks are bringing new hires into the organization, is creating a employee profile, right? What are some of the things that do they enjoy traveling? What's their favorite snack? Favorite movies, these types of things, and then you can use that as a playbook to as incentives, or just as gifts or other things, and all of a sudden, that individual then feels seen. And we remember one organization we were talking to, and they were like, yeah, all of a sudden my favorite snack showed up on my desk just randomly. Like in that moment, they felt like, I'm home.
Nice.
These people get me, and this is amazing, right? And so subtle things like that, but we've got to put in the work to pull all that humanness out, if we're going to cultivate more connections and belonging at work.
Definitely. What do you think about having people having their videos off on a video meeting when other people have them on?
I've got mixed feelings about it.
Right.
I'd say probably 90% of the people that I talk to, they're always like, we want your cameras on. We got to see you, because we don't get to be in person. So I got to see you. And it is helpful in certain regards. And I think it is useful. And I think there's a time to do that. But Zoom fatigue, right? Having your camera on all day, it can be taxing, and research shows specifically for introverts, it's extremely taxing.
Right.
And so if their camera's on and they've been in video meetings all day, they're going to be less likely to engage than if it was off. And they've also done studies to where if two people are in a room and they shut off the lights, so your visual, your vision is impaired, right? You can't see the other person.
Yeah.
Studies show that individuals actually display greater empathy and better listening when they can't see the other individual, because they're really listening to tone of voice and what the person's actually saying. And that, I think, translates really well into Zoom or video meetings, because it's unusual for us to see ourselves when we're communicating with others, right? So we're looking at that, and we're looking at everyone else.
Like,
so it can be highly, yeah. So it can be very taxing. So I think folks need to really understand that, if a video's off doesn't mean that they're fully disengaged. They could be more engaged. And so, I caution organizations and leaders who really push to have everyone's camera on. And I lead hundreds of virtual sessions with clients, and I never once ask folks to turn their cameras on, because I don't think it's necessary.
Yeah, I like that. No, that's good. On the no video thing, it's interesting. I often find if I'm doing a phone call with someone and you've got the old earbuds in, you feel even closer to someone. It's like they're right in your ear. and the voices. It's really pretty. It's a quite it's a very close experience, to have just a good old fashioned phone call.
Yeah, very fascinating. Yeah, I think that sounds right, and I resonates with me too. I'm reading a great book right now that if folks enjoying this conversation, this book might be uh, insightful. It's called The Power of Strangers by Joe Keohan. And in that book, he cites some research about why humans have the whites in our eyes.
Oh,
And that's actually, we developed that over, all these years as a cue to those around us as where our attention is. Because it's not helpful. If you think about, wolves or other
yeah,
primal animals, they don't have those whites in the eyes because that can tell where you're looking, and it can give away, if that's the prey you're going to snatch or something else, right? So the
interesting.
fact that humans have the whites in our eyes is really pretty extraordinary. And again, it kind of goes back to the question you asked toward the top of our conversation: is how do you know if you're connecting with somebody? Well, if you can feel it, right? Actually, our
Yeah,
eyes were have evolved in such a way that giving direct attention to someone is highly important. And this, I don't know why I'm mentioning this. I guess is
no,
the video. This is the pro side of the video, is that
it's
you can see if someone's paying attention. Of course, you're not quite sure if they're looking at you. Like right
it's
now, I'm looking at myself rather than you,
yeah,
Lewis.
same. But you know what it
Um,
is though? It's much more tiring to keep eye contact with you on a
mm,
video
mm,
than it would be if we were face to face. I don't know
yeah,
about if you feel the same about that or not, but it's a different type of energy. Like it can be quite draining on a video if you're on the video all day long. As much as I'm a people's person and I love meeting people, I still need to recharge myself
hmm
after too many video. Whereas I met a friend the other day face to face for a drink. Hadn't seen him for ages, and I came out like buzzing, so like high energy. I was like, yeah, it's great. It's a different, it's different. It's very
yeah.
like you want to look at someone on the video, but it's tiring. Plus, you've got the emails flashing up, and then you've got something else distracting you, and it's a
Yeah,
whole
it's a lot. I'll share with you my latest strategy, and I'm curious if this relates with you, and I'd love to kind of hear
yeah,
your thoughts on this. But I always, if I'm I always defer to the other folks. So like if I start a video meeting, I always start with my video off.
right,
And if the other person who hosts the meeting, if their video's on, then I will turn mine on. But if theirs is off, I use that as a cue, as they probably had enough video today, so I'm going to keep mine off too. And that seems to work for me. Of course, sometimes I turn mine on if I'm the one that hosts meeting, and if a client's talking to me, because I do this for a living, I speak and present
yep.
virtually, so they're wanting to get a sense of what I feel like on video. So sometimes I'll keep it on, but I've been doing that as a default, so to not over index on video. What do you think to that, and what's your kind of
Just
approach to
before
all
I
this?
answer, how many people turn up with the video on versus video off?
I would say probably 70% of people, 60 to 70% of people will have the video on.
Video on,
It's
yeah.
kind of their go-to. Yeah.
For me, if I'm interviewing a candidate for a position, I will, and if I've asked them for a video interview, then it's a video interview.
Right.
So they will. I won't give them the option. Oh, I'll give. Yeah, I won't give them the option. Like we have a few different stages. So like the first kind of stage would be a phone call, then would have a video interview. If they were in the same city or were able to travel, meet them face to face. So I think there's different bits because I think you can find out different things about people from these different ways of meeting, whether it's a phone, whether it's a video. So yeah, and obviously it's an interview, so it's a bit of a like unnatural scenario. Like you want the job, or you got really no interest in speaking to me. I've just tapped you on the shoulder and convinced you want to have a chat, and you're quite happily employed. So whatever the scenario is, I actually say let's do a video call. And then if they don't want to, they could say, well, can we do a phone call? And
hmm
then so that's the thing with clients. Again, often it's decided, like they might email me or vice versa saying, hey, do you want to do a video call? Otherwise it's phone. So that's what I do. And I don't do many group, and unlike you, I don't do a huge amount of group presentations or anything like that. So it's often one-on-one, or the content like this, where we're doing a video cast, and it's obviously on video, and it's
Mhm.
pre-COVID. I'm calling it BC, before COVID.
Right.
It used to be come into my office, we've got the mics, and we do a podcast. And so BC, it was all podcasting. But then when COVID hit and no one wanted to come see me in my office to do a podcast, we ended up moving to video, which has been wonderful, because we would never have done a podcast together. You and I were in a completely different city, country,
Yeah.
etc., etc. So yeah, that's how it's been. That's how it's been for me. But there's a lot of nuance to it, and a lot of kind of different companies have different rules, I guess, because I'm seeing some companies have put rules in place about
Mhm.
having video on, video off. And relating it to connection, what would you suggest that companies do? And then as a second question, for individuals that are feeling lonely, can they also take some kind of ownership for themselves and do some things to increase their own connection with people?
Yeah, absolutely. So from an organizational standpoint, are you asking kind of in general about loneliness, or what should folks do about
So I
the
think
the
so.
video
For
meeting?
example, so given what is it, 70% of my team are lonely right now, what should I be doing?
Yeah, so we created a 4-step framework. We won't go through all of it today, but the first step is to look at loneliness, and essentially what we're saying is understand that this is something that affects all of us, and it's
Yeah.
impacting your team, and try to understand why it's happening and to get a good sense there. And then we've also created a loneliness self-assessment. So if you go to lesslonely.com and you scroll to the bottom, we have a free assessment. It's empirically validated to assess how strong your connections are to others. So that's a great
We'll
way
put
to
that in
kind
the
of.
comments below
Oh,
after.
fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's a great way for an individual to kind of assess. And then we worked with some researchers out of Harvard and University of Alabama and University of Canterbury out of New Zealand, and we created the world's first assessment that, again, is statistically validated on that assesses how strong the connections are across the team. And you can find that at Team Connection Assessment.
So these
And
are kind of like psychometric
yeah,
questionnaires. Yeah.
yep. So you take it and you can kind of evaluate how it measures 3 things. It measures how connected you are to the team, the organization, and the work itself. And so
Nice.
you can get a good baseline, and you can quantify how strong your connection is. And ultimately, the goal would be to have your whole team go through it, so that you've really kind of got an understanding of, where are the gaps here, and where can we put some additional emphasis. And so you take the assessment, and that spits out your custom results, and then a ton of recommendations based on those results on what you can do to create more connection and belonging at work. So we wrote the book to broach the conversation. There's a ton of strategies and a framework in there, but then we built all these other tools to really help folks quantify this and move forward in a very confident way that they can tackle this. And one of the most refreshing things we've been getting from readers and our clients is that it just takes me, and they love hearing that. I don't have to go change company culture. I don't have to convince my whole team or all these executives. I can just do some simple pro-social behaviors myself to pull myself out of loneliness, or to start pulling others onto the team. And we're only as unified as our loneliest members. So it's on all of us to be thinking about who might be isolating or detaching from the team, and what can we do to pull them back in.
Love that. You mentioned pro-social, that's the word.
Yeah,
So what is
pro-social.
pro-social activities? Yeah. So if you're feeling lonely now, what should I do? There's some little kind of steps that I can do to try and pull myself out, so to speak.
Yeah. So what's tricky about loneliness is if you're experiencing it, you tend to revert inward, which is not what
Yeah.
you want to be doing. You want to revert outward and try to establish connections. And so that's why loneliness can be a quick downward spiral. As you detach from others, you then become distrustful of others. And so that's why it's important to have this conversation at a community level so that others can identify and start to do pro-social behaviors. But, something that's really tangible is to ask someone for advice. You can approach someone and just say, hey, I've got, I'm working on X, Y, and Z, and I'd love to get your advice. This is someone that they might perceive as being detached, right? And just asking for advice. Individually, gratitude has been shown to really move the lever as it relates to improving loneliness. So that's when it could be a simple gratitude text. It could be an email that you send to someone that you haven't talked to a while, and just mentioning how grateful you are for their connection or what they've done for you in your career or personal life. We also have an activity that we call scroll through memory lane. So you scroll through your phone for 1 year ago today and find someone that you were with and send them that picture and with a couple items. So there's these subtle things that we can do to cultivate these deeper connections. And the last thing I'll mention is one of the biggest attractors to connections is busyness. So research shows that the busier we are, the less likely we are to engage with others. So something, if we're feeling this disconnection is how do we start creating more margin? It's even been proven that cities where things move faster, right, where people actually walk faster in cities and things are just moving faster, people are more likely to identify people as objects and to not really address people and connect because they're just moving fast. So if how do you use that as a metaphor, and how do you start taking more leisurely walks and keep picking your head up and eye contact, smile? There's these subtle things that we can be doing. And again, it doesn't take much. We just got to be intentional about it, and we have to stay at it because we don't just connect with someone once and then our well-being bucket's filled forever. We have to constantly re-engage.
You got to spend time. And I like that. Cities can be very lonely places. I was reading a book by called Tribe by 𝐫𝐫𝐤𝐻𝐿. I don't know if you've read it.
No, I haven't.
It's really, really worth the read. And what some of the things he was saying was humans are really great in smaller groups, 100, 150 people. And, in the city, I mean, I live in London and there's 12 million people here. Do I know my neighbors? Some of them. But I've got probably 1,000 people within a short walk. Half of them, you just, or if you're living in a block of flats in New York City, do you even, you walk in, you walk out, it takes a while to really plug into a city and effort. You're right. Like finding similar people with similar interests, spending time with them. It takes a lot of effort, really does a lot of effort from people. And the bigger thing, I really like what you said about asking people for their advice and for help. I think that's wonderful, and especially if you can. For me, anyway, if I see someone's lonely or struggling, asking them for help is like really good. Like they feel really good about it. It's a really good thing to do.
Like a great line is, if you were me, what would you do? So all of a sudden, if that person's feeling detached, now they're demonstrating empathy, right? They're putting themselves in your shoes. So now they're no longer, kind of in this downward loneliness spiral where they're just thinking about themselves. They're now thinking about someone else. And we actually created a deck of cards. It's 30 cards that have different pro-social behaviors on them that take 2 to 3 minutes. And the goal there was to create these decks so you can, give them to your team, to where you just take one a day, you read it, and then you go and act that thing. And because we have to be reminded of it. And I think what's holding us back, and what's really caused a huge barrier in all this, is humans. It's what they call it, the principle of least effort. So we will go towards the convenience. We'll just order the food on our device rather than talking with someone on the phone, right? We'll just watch a show rather than call an old friend. And we're doing that even in the work world, right? I'm just going to send a text message versus, setting up a video chat or whatever else. And so we have to be really careful about doing that too often. So, that's not going to go away. As humans, we're going to continue to adopt these things that are convenient. But if they're convenient, that means we're saving time. And I want to encourage folks, with that time you've saved, make time for other people and to connect with others in some form or fashion, because we need it. Belonging is not our most dire need, right? Our physiological needs are what's most dire for us to stay alive, but belonging is the most significant need we have. The longest study of adult development proves that folks that have quality relationships outlive and are healthier than anyone else. And this is a study of over 2,000 people for 80 plus years. It's quality relationships. So belonging is our most significant need. And so we got to start treating it like that.
Yeah. Love that. Love that. What a great place to end. Just before you do, I remember in the office, you used to have a desk phone. I used to call someone up, now you don't do that. Now it's like, hey, you've got time at 2:00 on Tuesday to jump on a call with me.
Yeah, because we're all busy, right? There's 1,000 things in our inbox, and yeah, how did we get here, right, Lewis? How did we get here?
Bring back the desk phone and the random phone call from someone. I love that.
Yeah.
Ryan, how can people find you guys if they need some help, and what's the best place for them to find you?
I'd say there's three ways. Number one is lesslonely.com. That's kind of the one-stop shop for everything that I mentioned. And you can connect with me there and follow us on social and the assessments and the Connect Deck. All that's there. We do a ton of speaking, so you can reach out to us there. On social, you can find us at Ryan and Steven. So that's at Ryan and Steven on all social platforms, even TikTok. We haven't done any of the viral trends just yet, but we're trying to send as much connect yet. And then the third spot is we've got a podcast called The Case for Connection, where we are making a strong case for why you and I need more connection. And we unpack really fascinating research. So we start with an interesting story or research, we unpack it, and then we discuss how we can weave that through our personal or professional lives. So check us out at lesslonely.com, at Ryan and Steven on social, or the Case for Connection podcast.
Awesome. I look forward to listening to your podcast episodes. I'll dive in that. That's on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, all that stuff.
Everywhere you listen. Yep.
Awesome. Well, subscribe to his podcast, subscribe to this as well. And Ryan, thank you so much for joining. Really appreciate it. Great to make the connection. And hopefully at some point we get to meet face to face, which would be sweet.
I would love that. Thank you. And thanks, everyone.
Pleasure.